The cake sat on Diana Westfield's marble countertop, its sweet aroma filling her kitchen with a scent that should have been inviting. Instead, something about it made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. Mother's intuition, she called it. The same feeling that had kept her son safe all these years was now screaming that something wasn't right. Diana had survived too much in her 55 years to ignore these warnings, especially when they concerned her only child, Christopher. Diana stood in her elegant kitchen, morning light streaming through large windows that overlooked her meticulously maintained garden. She absently twisted the diamond wedding band she still wore 5 years after her husband's passing, a habit that surfaced whenever she was deep in thought. Her honey-brown bob, freshly styled, framed a face that had aged gracefully, with expressive eyes that missed very little and high cheekbones that had served her well in business negotiations over the years. The white blazer she wore over a silk blouse spoke of the meeting she'd attended earlier that morning, another acquisition for Westfield Enterprises, the company she'd built alongside her late husband and now ran with unwavering determination. A peace offering, Christopher had said when he dropped off the cornbread cake that morning. The hopeful look in his eyes had been almost childlike. "Vanessa made it especially for you, Mom. She's really trying." Diana hadn't had the heart to tell him what she really thought of his wife's sudden gesture of goodwill. After 2 years of marriage, this was the first time Vanessa had made any genuine effort to connect with her. 2 years of watching her son drift further away, manipulated by a woman who had appeared in his life suspiciously soon after he'd been featured in Boston's 30 Under 30 list as the heir to the Westfield fortune. The phone call she'd received last night still echoed in her mind. Christopher's voice had been strained as he relayed Vanessa's latest complaint. "Mom, Vanessa was crying again last night. She says you completely ignored her at Sunday dinner when she asked about your charity foundation. She's really hurt." Diana had bitten her tongue rather than point out that Vanessa had been on her phone throughout most of the meal, looking up only occasionally to shoot conspiratorial glances at her supposed brother, Blake, who seemed to accompany the couple everywhere. The so-called siblings shared no physical resemblance whatsoever. He with his dark features, and her with strawberry blonde hair and pale skin. Their story about being raised by a grandmother after their parents died conveniently eliminated any family members who might contradict their relationship. Diana picked up a silver cake knife from her drawer, its weight reassuring in her hand. The cornbread cake was beautifully made, with a swirl of cream cheese and what looked like guava preserves in the center. It looked perfect, too perfect, especially coming from a woman who had once proudly announced at a family gathering that she didn't believe in cooking, and considered it an outdated expectation of women. As Diana cut into the cake, she noticed a slightly bitter smell beneath the sweet aroma. 25 years of making this exact recipe for Christopher's birthday had honed her senses to know exactly how it should smell. This wasn't right. She set the knife down and moved the cake to the far corner of the counter, her mind racing. The doorbell chimed, its melodious sound echoing through the spacious home. Diana checked her watch. 2:15 in the afternoon. She wasn't expecting anyone. Through the security monitor by the door, she recognized Blake Wellington's tall figure, his expensive suit and confident stance a stark contrast to the nervous energy he seemed to be radiating today. "Diana, sorry to drop by unannounced," he said smoothly when she opened the door, though not widely enough to invite him in. "Vanessa thinks she left her wallet here yesterday when she and Christopher stopped by." Diana's eyebrow arched slightly. "Christopher and Vanessa weren't here yesterday, Blake." A flicker of something, alarm, crossed his face before his practiced smile returned. "Oh, my mistake. Must have been the day before. Mind if I check?" "She's quite worried." Diana studied him for a moment, her mind working quickly. "Actually, I was just about to have some coffee. Why don't you join me? I have that cake Vanessa sent over this morning." "I really shouldn't. I'm in a bit of a hurry," he replied, checking his watch. "I insist," Diana said, her tone leaving no room for argument as she stepped back, finally opening the door wider. "It will only take a few minutes, and I've been wanting to speak with you anyway, about Christopher and Vanessa." "Oh, Kathy." The mention of a conversation about the couple seemed to catch his interest, and reluctantly, he stepped inside. Diana led him to the kitchen, her heels clicking rhythmically on the marble floor. She could feel his eyes taking in the details of her home, the original artwork, the antique furniture pieces, the subtle signs of wealth that wasn't flashy, but was substantial. "Beautiful place," he commented, settling onto one of the kitchen island's bar stools. "Very tasteful." "Thank you," Diana replied, turning her back to him as she prepared 2 cups of coffee. "My late husband and I designed it together. He had exceptional taste." She placed a steaming cup in front of Blake, noting how his eyes drifted to the cake on the counter. "You know," she continued conversationally, "I was just thinking about what a coincidence it is that you and Vanessa both ended up in Boston. You mentioned you grew up in Seattle, right?" "Portland, actually," he corrected quickly. Too quickly. Diana remembered distinctly that Vanessa had mentioned Seattle multiple times. "My mistake," she smiled, sliding a plate with a generous slice of the cornbread cake in front of him. "You must try this. I rarely get to enjoy Vanessa's baking. She's never made anything for me before." Blake looked at the cake, then back at Diana. "You haven't tried it yet?" "I was waiting for the coffee," she lied smoothly, pouring herself a cup but making no move to cut a slice for herself. "Please, I insist. Tell me what you think." Something in her steady gaze must have made refusing difficult. Reluctantly, he picked up the fork and took a bite. "It's good," he said after swallowing. "Very sweet." "Vanessa must have gotten my recipe from Christopher," Diana mused, watching him take another bite. "I've made this for his birthday every year since he was a child." Blake nodded, finishing the slice with surprising speed. He checked his watch again. "I should really go look for that wallet." "Of course," Diana said, making no move to help him search. "Though, as I said, they weren't here yesterday. Or the day before, actually. It's been over a week since I've had them over." Blake stood, his forehead suddenly beading with perspiration despite the perfectly regulated temperature in the house. "Maybe she left it another time," he said, his words slightly slurred. I don't feel—" Diana watched him calmly, maintaining her distance as he gripped the counter for support. "Not feeling well, Blake? Perhaps you should sit down." "What's in the—" he began, but couldn't finish as he slumped back onto the stool, his face suddenly pale. "I think you should call Vanessa," Diana suggested, sliding his phone toward him across the counter. "Tell her you ate the cake she made for me." The panic in his eyes told her everything she needed to know. With trembling fingers, he dialed, and Diana could hear Vanessa's voice answer brightly on the other end. "Blake, did you find it?" "Vanessa," he managed, his voice weak. "I ate the cake. The one you made for Diana." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Then, "You did what?" Diana took the phone gently from his weakening grip. "Hello, Vanessa. This is Diana. I think you and I need to have a conversation about what exactly you put in that cake you sent me. Blake isn't looking very well." The call ended abruptly. Diana calmly walked to her landline and dialed 911. "I need an ambulance," she said clearly into the receiver. "And the police. I believe I've just witnessed an attempted murder." She gave her address, then hung up and returned to Blake, who was now slumped over the counter, conscious but clearly in distress. "Why?" she asked him simply. His eyes, clouded with pain, met hers. "The company," he whispered, "worth millions. Christopher would inherit everything. And then he would have had an unfortunate accident too," Diana finished for him. "How convenient that would have been for you and Vanessa." The distant wail of sirens grew louder as Diana Westfield stood in her kitchen, watching the man who had planned her death struggle to remain conscious. The mother's intuition that had saved her life now turned to her son, and the heartbreak that awaited him when he discovered the truth about the woman he had married. By 7 o'clock that evening, Diana's immaculate living room had become an impromptu police command center. Officer Ryan Daniels sat across from her, his broad shoulders hunched slightly as he reviewed his notes for the third time. The distinguished officer, with salt and pepper hair at his temples that belied his 38 years, had been thorough in his questioning, his deep voice reassuringly professional as crime scene technicians moved methodically through her kitchen. "Mrs. Westfield, I understand this is difficult," he said, his pen poised over his notepad, "but I need you to walk me through your suspicions about your daughter-in-law one more time. What specifically made you believe the cake was poisoned before Mr. Wellington consumed it?" Diana took a measured sip from her water glass, her hand steady despite the chaos of the day. The elegant living room with its cream-colored sofas and carefully curated art collection seemed at odds with the gravity of their conversation. "Officer Daniels, I've been making that cornbread cake for my son for 25 years. I know exactly how it should smell." This one had a distinct bitter undertone. "Dirty," she set her glass down on a coaster, leaving no ring on the polished wood of her side table. But more importantly, it was the timing. After 2 years of barely acknowledging my existence, except to turn my son against me, Vanessa suddenly sends a homemade cake? The same week I finalized changes to my will and company succession plan? Officer Daniels raised an eyebrow. "You recently changed your will?" The board meeting was yesterday morning. As a family-owned business, major changes to succession planning require board approval. Diana's gaze was unwavering. "My attorney advised updating my estate plan given certain concerns I had about Christopher's marriage. Nothing that would disinherit him, but provisions to protect the company should anything happen to him." The board approved it unanimously. "And you believe your daughter-in-law somehow knew about these changes?" "My assistant mentioned that someone had accessed my calendar on the company server. The meeting was clearly marked." Diana's fingers absently traced the edge of her armchair. "I didn't think much of it at the time." The front door burst open before Officer Daniels could respond. Christopher Westfield rushed in, his normally composed appearance disheveled, his blue eyes, so like his father's, wild with confusion and anger. "Mom, what's happening? I just got a call that Blake is in the hospital and Vanessa's been taken in for questioning." His voice cracked slightly as he took in the scene. The police officers, the evidence markers in the kitchen visible through the doorway. They're saying something about attempted murder. This has to be some kind of mistake. Diana stood, her heart breaking at what she had to tell her only child. She'd protected him all his life, from schoolyard bullies to predatory business partners, but she couldn't shield him from this truth. "Christopher," she said gently, moving toward him, "sit down, sweetheart." "I don't want to sit down. I want someone to explain what's going on." He ran his hands through his dark hair, a gesture so reminiscent of his father that Diana felt a pang of loss even after all these years. "Vanessa called me crying, saying the police have it all wrong, that you've turned them against her somehow." Officer Daniels stood, his notepad forgotten. "Mr. Westfield, I'm Officer Ryan Daniels. Your mother has reason to believe that the cake your wife sent over this morning was poisoned. Mr. Wellington consumed a piece and became violently ill. He's currently in intensive care at Boston General." Christopher's face drained of color. That's impossible. Vanessa wouldn't, she couldn't. Preliminary tests on the cake have detected traces of a compound consistent with rat poison. Officer Daniels continued, his tone professional but gentle. "We're waiting on the lab for final confirmation, but Mr. Wellington's symptoms align with ingestion of such a substance." "No," Christopher whispered, finally sinking onto the sofa. "There has to be another explanation. Maybe it was an accident. Maybe she used the wrong ingredient without realizing." Diana sat beside her son, not touching him yet, giving him space to process. "Christopher, there's more. When Blake was here, before the ambulance arrived, he said something. About the company. About your inheritance." Christopher's head snapped up. "What are you talking about?" "He implied that they had a plan. That after I was gone, something would happen to you as well." The words felt like broken glass in her mouth, but Diana forced them out. The truth, no matter how painful, was all they had now. Officer Daniels cleared his throat. "Mr. Westfield, we've been investigating Mr. Wellington's background. He is not, as he claimed, your wife's brother. His real name is Blake Wellington, and he has a history of fraud charges in California. He was never convicted, but the pattern is concerning." Christopher shook his head vehemently. "No, that's not. They grew up together. Vanessa told me all about their childhood, about their grandmother who raised them after their parents died. We can find no record of this grandmother," Officer Daniels said quietly. "No death certificates for parents with their names, no adoption records, nothing to substantiate their claimed relationship. What we did find, however, were several photographs online from 3 years ago showing them in romantic situations in Miami." Christopher stood abruptly, pacing the room like a caged animal. "This is insane. All of it. Vanessa loves me. We're happy together." "Are you?" Diana asked softly. "Or has she been gradually isolating you, turning you against me, against your old friends? When was the last time you spoke to James or Michael? Your friends since college?" Christopher's steps faltered. James and Michael, once fixtures in his life, had indeed fallen away in the past 2 years. Vanessa had always had a reason why they shouldn't meet up, why they weren't good influences. "That doesn't mean anything," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Christopher." Diana stood and finally approached her son, gently placing her hands on his shoulders. "I know you don't want to believe this. I know how much you love her. But I need you to think clearly now. Has Vanessa shown any unusual interest in your inheritance? In the company? In my will?" He tried to pull away, but then stopped, a memory surfacing. She did ask last week if I was still the sole beneficiary of your estate. She said it was because she was updating our own wills and needed to know for the paperwork." Diana nodded, her heart heavy. "And Blake? How often is he around? Does it seem normal to you that your wife's brother is present at almost every family gathering? Every dinner? Every holiday?" Christopher's face crumpled slightly. "She said they were close, that after losing their parents, they promised to always be there for each other." "And have you ever met anyone else from their past? Any childhood friends? Distant relatives? Former teachers?" The question hung in the air, unanswered but telling. Officer Daniels's phone buzzed. He stepped away to answer it, speaking in low tones before returning to them, his expression grave. "That was the hospital. Mr. Wellington is conscious and has asked to speak with us. He's offering information in exchange for consideration in charging." He looked directly at Christopher. "And Mrs. Crane is asking specifically to see you, Mr. Westfield. She's refusing to speak to anyone else." Christopher looked torn, his world visibly crumbling around him. "I need to see her. I need to hear her explanation." "Christopher, no." Diana gripped his arm. "She's manipulating you, just as she has been from the beginning." "I have to know the truth, Mom." He pulled away, his voice breaking. "I have to hear it from her." Officer Daniels intervened. "Mr. Westfield, seeing your wife right now would compromise the investigation. However, we can arrange for you to observe her interview from another room. Would that be acceptable?" After a moment of internal struggle, Christopher nodded stiffly. "I'm coming too," Diana said firmly. "Mom, I don't think—" "I'm coming," she repeated, meeting her son's gaze with the same determination that had built a business empire. "Whatever we learn, we face it together." 3 hours later, Diana sat beside her son in a small observation room at the police station, watching through one-way glass as Vanessa Crane sat across from Officer Daniels and a female detective. Gone was the perfectly coiffed, confident woman who had systematically worked to drive a wedge between Diana and her son. In her place sat a disheveled figure with smeared makeup and calculating eyes that darted continuously to the mirror, as if she could see through it to Christopher. Mrs. Westfield, Officer Daniels had said earlier, I should warn you that these interviews can be difficult to watch, especially when they involve family members. Diana had straightened her spine, her gaze steady. Officer Daniels, I've been watching that woman manipulate my son for 2 years. Nothing she says now could possibly be more painful than that. She'd been wrong. As Vanessa began to speak, weaving a tale of how Diana had mistreated her, how Blake had acted independently, how she was an innocent victim in all this, Diana felt each lie like a physical blow, not for herself, but for her son, whose face grew paler with each fabrication. She hated me from the beginning, Vanessa was saying, tears strategically falling. She never thought I was good enough for Christopher. She threatened to change her will if we didn't divorce. I only made that cake as a peace offering. Christopher's hands clenched into fists on his knees. Diana placed her palm gently over one of them, saying nothing. There were no words that could ease this kind of betrayal. Then, Officer Daniels placed a tablet on the table, turning it to face Vanessa. Ms. Crane, we've been provided with some interesting information about your relationship with Mr. Wellington. Would you care to explain these photographs? The color drained from Vanessa's face as she stared at the screen. The detective swiped through several images, Vanessa and Blake on a beach, embracing in ways that left no doubt about their relationship. Vanessa and Blake at what appeared to be a luxury resort, toasting with champagne, the two of them kissing outside a hotel room door. These were taken 8 months ago in Barbados, the detective said calmly, during what you told your husband was a girls' trip with college friends. Another swipe. And these are from 3 weeks ago, when you said you were visiting your sick aunt in Chicago. Beside Diana, Christopher made a small, wounded sound. Diana squeezed his hand tighter, but kept her eyes on Vanessa, watching as the mask finally began to slip. Mr. Wellington has been quite forthcoming since his condition stabilized, Officer Daniels continued. He's provided some very detailed information about your plans together. Would you like to hear what he's told us? Or would you prefer to give us your version first? Vanessa's eyes darted wildly around the room, her mind visibly calculating her options. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost its tearful quality, replaced by something harder, colder. Whatever Blake said is a lie. He was obsessed with me, has been for years. He found out I was happily married and couldn't stand it. He's trying to ruin my life out of jealousy. The female detective leaned forward. So, you're maintaining that you had no knowledge of the poison in the cake? That you didn't plan with Mr. Wellington to eliminate your mother-in-law and eventually your husband to gain control of Westfield Enterprises? Of course not. Vanessa's voice rose. That's insane. I love Christopher. In the observation room, Christopher finally broke. Turn it off, he whispered. Please, I can't watch any more of this. Diana nodded to the technician, and the audio feed was silenced, though the video continued. They watched in silence as Vanessa's expressions cycled through indignation, calculation, and finally, seeing that her performance wasn't working, cold anger. She never loved me, Christopher said softly, his voice hollow. Any of it. It was all about the money. Diana turned to her son, cupping his face in her hands, as she had when he was a little boy with scraped knees. Not all of it, sweetheart. No one could spend time with you and not come to love you for who you are. Whatever her initial motivation, I have to believe there were moments of genuine feeling. Christopher looked away, tears streaming silently down his face. How did I not see it? Any of it? Because you have your father's heart, Diana said simply. You see the best in people. You trust. You love openly. Those are beautiful qualities, Christopher. Don't let her take them from you. Through the glass, they watched as Officer Daniels placed handcuffs on Vanessa Crane, reading her rights as she was led from the room, her face a mask of cold fury. What happens now? Christopher asked, his voice small in the quiet room. Diana took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders as she had through every crisis of her life. Now, we go home. We begin again, together. Artudi. The following week passed in a blur of legal meetings, police interviews, and media speculation. Diana had activated her crisis management team at Westfield Enterprises, the same team that had guided the company through market crashes and industry upheavals. Their primary focus now was protecting Christopher from the vultures circling what the Boston Herald had dubbed the poisoned inheritance plot. Diana stood at her office window on the 40th floor of Westfield Tower, gazing out at the Boston skyline as dusk settled over the city. The buildings glowed golden in the fading light, a stark contrast to the darkness that had nearly consumed her family. Her office, with its understated elegance, walnut desk, cream walls, and carefully selected modern art, had always been her sanctuary. Today, it felt like a war room. The arraignment is scheduled for Monday. Elizabeth Chen, Westfield's chief legal counsel, said from her seat at the conference table. At 57, Elizabeth had been Diana's friend and advisor for over 20 years, her sharp legal mind matched only by her unwavering loyalty. Both Vanessa and Blake are being held without bail, given the severity of the charges and flight risk assessment. Diana nodded without turning from the window. And the press? Marcus Reynolds, head of public relations, cleared his throat. We've issued the statement as discussed. Minimal details, expression of shock, request for privacy, full cooperation with authorities. Most respectable outlets are honoring our request to leave Christopher out of the spotlight. Most, but not all, Diana said, finally turning to face her team. She picked up a tabloid from her desk, its garish headline screaming, "Honey Trap Marriage. Millionaire. Heir duped by gold-digging bride and fake brother." Marcus winced. "I'm sorry, Diana. We're monitoring social media and working with Christopher's building to keep photographers away from his apartment." Diana tossed the tabloid into the trash with practiced disdain. "And the company? Are the shareholders getting nervous?" "There was some initial volatility," reported Sophia Abrams, Westfield's CFO. "But once we clarified that neither the company operations nor leadership were affected, the market stabilized. Your quick action in this crisis has actually reinforced confidence in management." Diana allowed herself a small nod of acknowledgement. In business, at least, she knew how to navigate treacherous waters. It was her son's emotional state that concerned her more deeply than any stock fluctuation. "How is Christopher doing?" Elizabeth asked gently, voicing the question that hung in the air. Diana sank into her chair, allowing herself a rare moment of vulnerability before the people she trusted most. "He's devastated, humiliated, angry, all the things you'd expect." She pinched the bridge of her nose, fighting back the exhaustion that threatened to overwhelm her. "He's staying at my house for now. Can't face their apartment yet. Hasn't been sleeping much." "Has he spoken about what happened?" Marcus asked. "Barely. He's focusing on the practical aspects, the divorce filing, changing security protocols at his office, canceling their joint accounts." Diana's voice softened. "But the emotional reckoning? That will take time." The intercom on Diana's desk buzzed. "Mrs. Westfield, your son is here to see you." Diana straightened immediately, smoothing her silk blouse with an automatic gesture. "Send him in." She glanced at her team. "That's all for today. Thank you." As they gathered their materials, the door opened to reveal Christopher, looking more composed than he had in days, though the dark circles under his eyes told of continuing sleepless nights. He nodded politely to the departing executives, accepting their sympathetic smiles with quiet dignity. When they were alone, Diana approached her son, studying his face with the careful attention only a mother could give. "You got a haircut." Christopher ran a hand self-consciously through his shorter hair. "Thought it was time for a change." Diana nodded, understanding the deeper meaning. Small acts of reclaiming oneself after betrayal. She'd done the same after losing her husband. Redecorated their bedroom, changed her perfume, cut her hair. breaking associations, creating new ones. "Have you eaten?" she asked. A ghost of a smile touched Christopher's lips. "You've asked me that every day this week, Mom. And I'll keep asking until you start looking less like you're wasting away." She moved to the small bar in the corner of her office, pouring 2 fingers of scotch into crystal tumblers. She handed one to Christopher. "Join me?" He accepted the glass, and they moved to the sitting area by the window, settling into the comfortable leather chairs that had hosted countless business negotiations. For a moment, they sat in companionable silence, sipping their drinks and watching the city lights emerge as darkness fell. "I met with the divorce attorney today," Christopher finally said, his voice steady despite the pain underlying his words. "He says, given the circumstances, it should be straightforward. Criminal conviction for attempted murder tends to nullify prenuptial agreement protections." Diana nodded, allowing him the distance of discussing legal technicalities rather than emotions. "That's good. Elizabeth can coordinate with them if needed." Another silence stretched between them before Christopher spoke again, his voice lower. "I found something at the apartment today, when I went to pick up more clothes." He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small velvet box, placing it on the table between them. "It was hidden in the back of Vanessa's drawer. I wouldn't have found it if I hadn't been looking for her passport for the attorneys." Diana set down her glass and picked up the box, opening it to reveal a pair of diamond stud earrings, at least 3 carats each, set in platinum. She recognized them immediately. "These were mine, from the safe in my bedroom." Her voice was calm, but inside, a cold fury ignited. "They were a 20th anniversary gift from your father." Christopher's jaw tightened. "I never gave them to her, Mom. I would never have taken them without asking." "I know that, sweetheart." Diana closed the box, her mind racing. "Which means they broke into my home, accessed my safe." "The police should add theft to the charges," Christopher said bitterly. "Though I suppose that's hardly the worst of their crimes at this point." Diana slipped the earrings into her desk drawer, making a mental note to check the safe thoroughly for other missing items. "Did you find anything else of interest?" Christopher hesitated, then reached into his pocket again and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This was with the earrings. It's their timeline. For everything." He unfolded it, revealing a handwritten list in what Diana recognized as Vanessa's elegant script. Diana took the paper, her hand steady despite the revulsion she felt, touching something created with such calculated malice. The list was methodical, chilling in its precision. Phase 1, marriage to C, complete. Phase 2, isolate from mother. Ongoing, Phase 3, access to WE confidential info. Partial, Phase 4, eliminate DW. Pending, Phase 5, secure inheritance. Pending, Phase 6, eliminate CW. Accident during grief. Planning, Phase 7. B takes identity of financial advisor. Controls assets. Planning. Diana read it twice, forcing herself to absorb the cold-blooded plotting against not just herself, but her beloved son. When she finally looked up, Christopher was watching her, his expression a complex mixture of shame, anger, and grief. "I was nothing but a stepping stone to them," he said quietly, "a means to an end." Diana set the paper down carefully, as if it might contaminate everything it touched. "No, Christopher, you were an obstacle, one they couldn't simply eliminate immediately without raising suspicion." She leaned forward, holding his gaze. "But you were also the one thing they didn't account for in their plan." "What do you mean?" "They underestimated you, your intelligence, your resilience." Diana's voice grew stronger. "And they certainly underestimated the bond between us. They thought they could turn you against me so completely that you wouldn't question Vanessa's sudden concern for my well-being." Christopher looked away, shame washing over his features. "But they nearly succeeded, Mom. I did turn against you. I believed her when she said you were being difficult, being prejudiced against her for no reason." "You believed your wife," Diana corrected gently, "as any good husband would. There's no shame in that, Christopher. There is, when I ignored all the warning signs, when I dismissed your concerns as mere overprotectiveness." He set his glass down with more force than necessary. "God, when I think of how I spoke to you sometimes, defending her—" "That's exactly what they wanted," Diana said firmly. "To use your loyalty against you, to use your good heart as a weapon." She reached across and took his hand. But here's what they failed to understand, what they could never understand. Real love, the kind we have as family, isn't so easily broken. It bends, it strains, but it holds. Christopher's grip tightened on hers, his eyes suspiciously bright. "I don't know how to trust my judgment again, Mom. How do I ever trust myself to recognize genuine love after this?" The question hung between them, weighted with pain that couldn't be easily dismissed with platitudes. Diana considered her response carefully. "After your father died," she began slowly, "I felt something similar. Not betrayal, of course, but a fundamental shaking of my foundations. The future I had counted on was gone. The partnership I had built my life around had vanished." She gazed out at the city lights, remembering. "I questioned every decision, doubted my ability to run the company alone, wondered if I could ever feel secure again." Christopher watched her, his attention complete. Diana rarely spoke of the dark period after his father's death. "What changed?" he asked. "Time, work, purpose." Diana turned back to him. "And remembering who I was before the loss, the core of me that remained, even when everything around me had changed. I'm not sure I know who I am without her now," Christopher admitted, the words clearly difficult to speak aloud. 2 years of my life, Mom. 2 years believing I was building a future with someone who was plotting my death." Diana felt a surge of maternal protectiveness so fierce it nearly took her breath away. "You are Christopher James Westfield. You are brilliant, compassionate, and stronger than you know. You are your father's son, and my greatest joy." Her voice was unwavering. "One day, not today, not tomorrow, but one day, this will be a chapter in your story, not the whole book." Something in her words seemed to reach him. He straightened slightly, a flicker of his old self visible beneath the pain. "The police want me to testify at the trial. Will you?" He nodded, resolve hardening his features. "I need to look them in the eyes. Both of them. I need them to see that they didn't destroy me." Pride swelled in Diana's chest. "Then that's what we'll do." "We? You didn't think I'd let you face that alone, did you?" Diana raised an eyebrow. "Where you go, I go. That's the deal." For the first time in days, Christopher's smile reached his eyes. "Like when I was 7 and refused to go to the dentist unless you got a checkup too? Exactly like that, except with fewer lollipops at the end, I expect." Diana stood, smoothing her skirt. "Now, I'm famished, and I know for a fact that you haven't had a proper meal today. Dinner at Marcello's? Your father always said their osso buco could cure any ailment." Christopher stood as well, the weight on his shoulders seeming marginally lighter. "I'd like that." As they gathered their things to leave, Christopher paused at the door. "Mom, thank you for saving my life in every way possible." Diana cupped his cheek gently, seeing in him both the man he'd become and the boy he'd been. "That's what mothers do, sweetheart. We protect our own, always." Together, they walked out of the office, leaving behind the evidence of betrayal for another day. Outside the windows, Boston continued to shine in the darkness, a reminder that even after the deepest night, morning always returned. 3 months later, the Westfield family conference room had been transformed for final trial preparations. Case files and legal briefs covered the long mahogany table where business deals were typically negotiated. Large boards displayed timelines and evidence photographs, while yellow legal pads filled with handwritten notes were stacked at each chair. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, autumn painted the Boston Common in fiery oranges and deep reds, a stark contrast to the clinical atmosphere inside. Diana entered carrying 2 cups of coffee, her heels clicking rhythmically on the hardwood floor. She wore a perfectly tailored navy suit, her battle armor for the difficult day ahead. Christopher sat with the prosecution team, his head bent over documents as they reviewed his testimony one final time. The district attorney, Victoria Mendez, a formidable woman in her late 40s with a reputation for being meticulous and unrelenting, was explaining a point of procedure to him. "Remember," she was saying, "defense counsel will try to paint you as vengeful, as someone who couldn't accept that his wife had a close relationship with her brother. They'll suggest you collaborated with your mother to frame them both out of jealousy." Christopher nodded, his expression grim but composed. In the months since the arrest, Diana had watched her son rebuild himself piece by piece. The initial shock and devastation had hardened into something resolute. He had thrown himself into work, finding solace in the structured problems of engineering that his role as Westfield's technical director provided. He had started therapy, at Diana's gentle insistence. He had even, just last week, laughed genuinely at a dinner with old college friends who had rallied around him. Small victories, Diana thought, as she set a coffee beside him. The journey of healing measured in moments rather than miles. "They'll come after your mother too," Victoria continued, nodding her thanks to Diana for the coffee. "They'll try to suggest she orchestrated everything because she disapproved of your marriage from the beginning, that she manipulated the situation." "Let them try," Christopher replied, his voice steady. "We have the evidence, the timeline they wrote, the forensic analysis of the cake, Blake's confession." "Yes, but Blake's recanting much of that confession now," Victoria reminded him, claiming he was coerced, that he was confused from the poison still in his system. "The jury won't believe that," Christopher said, but a flicker of doubt crossed his face. Diana sat beside her son, brushing an imaginary speck from his charcoal gray suit jacket, a motherly gesture that made him smile despite the tension. "The jury," she said calmly, "will see a young man who was deeply betrayed by the woman he loved and her accomplice. They will see the evidence for what it is, and they will understand that no mother would poison herself to frame her daughter-in-law, no matter how much she might disapprove of a marriage." Victoria nodded approvingly. "Exactly the perspective we want to maintain. Straightforward, honest, emotional, without being overwrought." She checked her watch. "The court reconvenes in 90 minutes. I'll give you some time while I touch base with our forensic experts." When Victoria had left, Diana studied her son's profile. The past 3 months had left their mark. New lines around his eyes, a certain wariness in his expression that hadn't been there before. But there was strength too, hard-won and genuine. "How are you feeling?" she asked. Christopher sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Honestly, I keep going back and forth between wanting this to be over and dreading seeing them again." He rubbed his temples. "Last night I dreamed about her, about Vanessa. We were back at the lake house, that weekend last summer. Everything was normal, happy. Then I woke up and remembered all over again." Diana reached out, covering his hand with hers. "That's normal, sweetheart. The mind processes trauma in strange ways." "I know. Dr. Levine says the same thing." He attempted a smile. "Still feels awful, though." "It will get easier," Diana promised. "Not today, not tomorrow, but eventually." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, both watching the autumn leaves dance past the windows on a gust of wind. "Did I ever tell you about the time your father lost a major client right before our wedding?" Diana asked suddenly. Christopher looked up, surprised by the change of subject. "No, I don't think so. Reynolds Manufacturing. It would have been the biggest account your father had landed at that point. He worked on the pitch for months, was absolutely certain he had it in the bag." Diana smiled at the memory. 2 weeks before our wedding, they signed with a competitor. Just like that. All that work gone. What did Dad do? He was devastated. Questioned everything about his business approach, his capabilities. Started having doubts about whether he could provide for us, whether we should postpone the wedding. Diana's voice softened with the memory. "He came to my apartment looking like he'd been through war. Told me he'd understand if I wanted to reconsider marrying him." Christopher was fully engaged now, momentarily distracted from the trial preparations. What did you say? I told him he was being ridiculous, Diana chuckled. That I wasn't marrying his business prospects. I was marrying him. Then I ordered Chinese food, opened a bottle of wine, and made him tell me every single detail of what went wrong with the pitch. Did it help? By the end of the night, he had already started outlining a new approach for a different client. 6 months later, he landed an account twice the size of Reynolds. Diana squeezed her son's hand. Your father taught me something important that night, Christopher. Failure, even devastating, humiliating failure, isn't the end of the story unless you decide it is. Christopher absorbed this, nodding slowly. I get what you're saying, Mom, but this is different. Dad lost a client. I married a woman who was planning to kill us both. The circumstances are different, Diana acknowledged. The principle isn't. This terrible thing happened. It's part of your story now, but it doesn't define your whole story, and it certainly doesn't determine your ending. Before Christopher could respond, Victoria returned with Officer Ryan Daniels, now Detective Daniels, following a promotion partly due to his work on the Westfield case. Mrs. Westfield, Mr. Westfield. Detective Daniels greeted them with a respectful nod. His steady presence had been a constant throughout the investigation, his thorough work instrumental in building the case against Vanessa and Blake. Detective? Diana returned the greeting warmly. Any updates? Actually, yes. He glanced at Victoria, who nodded for him to continue. We've had a significant development. Blake Wellington is offering a full confession in exchange for a reduced sentence. Christopher stiffened beside Diana. What kind of reduction are we talking about? Instead of attempted first-degree murder with special circumstances, which could mean life without parole, he's looking at 25 years with possibility of parole after 15, Victoria explained. In exchange, he provides complete testimony against Vanessa Crane, including details we haven't been able to confirm yet. Like what? Diana asked. Detective Daniels consulted his notebook. Like confirmation that they've done this before. Different names, different target, same basic scheme. 3 years ago in Seattle, an elderly businessman named Howard Fletcher. Wellington posed as a financial advisor, Crane as his assistant. Fletcher died of what appeared to be heart failure. No autopsy was performed. A chill ran through the room at these words. Diana instinctively moved closer to Christopher, whose face had gone pale. They killed someone else? Christopher's voice was barely audible. And got away with it? We're reopening the Fletcher case based on this new information, Detective Daniels said. Seattle PD has already obtained an exhumation order. Victoria leaned forward. This changes the dynamics of the trial significantly. If Wellington testifies, his testimony combined with the physical evidence we already have makes our case against Crane nearly ironclad. And it spares Christopher from having to testify about the most painful details, Diana pointed out, thinking practically as always. Christopher seemed conflicted, emotions warring across his face. Part of me wants to face them both in court, to look them in the eye while the truth comes out. You'll still testify, Victoria assured him, but with Wellington's cooperation, we can focus your testimony on establishing the timeline and relationship dynamics rather than on the most traumatic elements. Diana watched her son carefully, seeing the internal struggle. What are you thinking, Christopher? He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so like his father's that it made Diana's heart ache. I'm thinking about this man Fletcher, how there was no one to fight for justice for him. No one who questioned his death or pushed for answers. He looked up, resolve hardening his features. If Wellington's testimony helps put Vanessa away for life and brings justice for Fletcher too, then I support the deal. Victoria nodded approvingly. I'll inform the DA's office of your position. It carries significant weight in their decision. After the prosecutors left to make the necessary calls, Christopher and Diana moved to the window, gazing out at the autumn scene below. The Boston Common was filled with people enjoying the crisp fall day, their lives continuing with a normalcy that felt distant to the Westfields. I keep thinking about who else they might have hurt. Christopher said quietly. People who never knew what hit them. Diana slipped her arm through his, offering silent support. I've been looking at properties, he said after a moment, changing the subject abruptly. Outside the city. There's a place in Concord with good bones, but needs complete renovation. Thought it might be a good project. Diana recognized this for what it was. A step forward. A decision to build something new. Renovation can be therapeutic, she said carefully. Your father and I practically rebuilt our first house ourselves. Well, with considerable professional help, she amended with a smile. I remember the stories. Dad nearly electrocuting himself trying to install a ceiling fan. Your father was brilliant with business strategy, but surprisingly inept with basic household wiring. Diana laughed. They shared the moment of lightness, both acutely aware of its preciousness amid the darkness of recent months. I'd like to see this property, Diana said. Perhaps this weekend, after the trial wraps up? Christopher nodded, then checked his watch. We should head to the courthouse soon. As they gathered their things, Christopher paused, his expression suddenly vulnerable. Mom, does it ever get easier? Living with the fact that someone you loved wasn't who you thought they were at all? Diana considered the question carefully, knowing her son needed honesty rather than platitudes. The shock fades, she said finally. The disbelief and sense of unreality diminish. The pain becomes less acute, more of a dull ache that resurfaces occasionally. She met his gaze directly. But there's a scar that remains. A certain wisdom that can feel like a burden sometimes. You learn to carry it, to integrate it into who you are. And eventually, you may even find it has value. What kind of value could possibly come from this? He asked, genuinely curious rather than bitter. Perspective, discernment, a deeper appreciation for authentic connection when you find it. Diana straightened his already perfect tie, a maternal gesture from childhood, and an unwavering certainty about who you can truly count on. A ghost of a smile touched Christopher's lips. You. I can always count on you. Always, Diana confirmed. Now and forever. They left the conference room together, heading toward a courtroom where the architects of their pain awaited justice. Outside, the October wind scattered crimson leaves across their path like nature's own reminder. Even in dying, there is beauty. Even in letting go, there is grace. And winter, however harsh, is never the end of the story. A year later, on a crisp autumn afternoon, much like the one that had framed the trial, Diana Westfield stood on the wraparound porch of Christopher's newly renovated Concord home. The sprawling 19th-century farmhouse sat on 4 acres of land bordered by mature maples and oaks, their leaves creating a canopy of gold and crimson against the clear blue sky. In her hands, she cradled a steaming mug of apple cider, the scent of cinnamon and cloves mingling with the earthy aroma of fallen leaves. From this vantage point, she could see Christopher in the side yard, sleeves rolled up despite the chill, deep in conversation with the landscape architect. They stood over blueprints spread across a makeshift table, gesturing toward different areas of the property, clearly debating the merits of various planting schemes. Christopher pointed toward an old oak tree, his expression animated in a way Diana hadn't seen in far too long. The transformation of the house had mirrored her son's own healing journey, both undertaken with deliberate care, both revealing unexpected challenges beneath the surface, both emerging stronger and more authentic than before. What had begun as a good project to occupy his hands and mind had evolved into something more, a true home, reflective of who Christopher was becoming rather than who he had been. Diana sipped her cider, allowing herself a moment of quiet contentment. The past year had tested them both in ways she couldn't have imagined, but standing here now, watching her son plan for spring plantings, for a future, she felt the deep satisfaction of having weathered the storm together. The trial had concluded with a finality that surprised even the prosecutors. Faced with Blake Wellington's comprehensive testimony and overwhelming forensic evidence, Vanessa Crane had finally abandoned her facade of innocence. In a calculated move to avoid the possibility of a death sentence when the Seattle case was added to the charges, she had accepted a plea deal: consecutive life sentences without possibility of parole. Diana could still recall the courtroom that day, the hushed tension as Vanessa stood before the judge, her designer outfit replaced by prison attire, her carefully cultivated charm giving way to cold pragmatism. Christopher had insisted on being present, his face impassive as the woman who had shared his bed, and his name admitted to calculating his death. "The defendant will now make her statement," the judge had announced. Vanessa had turned slightly, her eyes finding Christopher in the gallery. For a brief moment, something almost like regret had flickered across her features. "I accept the terms of the plea agreement," she had said, her voice steady and unrepentant. "I have nothing else to add. No apology, no explanation, no acknowledgement of the devastation she had caused. Just a businesslike acceptance of terms, as if she were concluding an unsatisfactory corporate negotiation rather than confessing to attempted murder." Afterward, outside the courthouse, a reporter had thrust a microphone toward Christopher, asking how he felt about the sentence. "Justice has been served," he had replied simply. Then, with Diana's supportive hand on his back, he had walked away from the cameras, away from the courthouse, and, symbolically, away from the darkest chapter of his life. The sound of tires on gravel pulled Diana from her memories. A familiar silver Mercedes pulled into the circular driveway, and she smiled in recognition. Right on time, as always. "Christopher," she called out, "James and Rebecca are here." The renovation of the house had coincided with the renovation of old friendships. James Hughes, Christopher's closest friend since their undergraduate days at MIT, had been the first to break through the isolation that had characterized Christopher's marriage. Where once Vanessa had skillfully manufactured reasons to cancel plans or create conflicts with Christopher's friends, now there were regular dinners, impromptu gatherings, and the slow rebuilding of a social circle based on genuine connection. Diana descended the porch steps to greet the couple, accepting Rebecca's warm hug and the bottle of wine James offered. "The place looks amazing," Rebecca exclaimed, gazing up at the house with its freshly painted navy shutters and restored gingerbread trim. "I can't believe it's the same building we saw last winter." "Wait until you see inside," Diana replied. "Christopher's been obsessing over every detail." James chuckled. "Some things never change. Remember his senior design project? He redid the entire interface the night before presentation because the user experience wasn't intuitive enough, and still graduated top of his class," Diana noted with maternal pride. They turned as Christopher approached, wiping his hands on a handkerchief, his face lighting up at the sight of his friends. The ease with which he embraced James, the genuine warmth in his smile, these were the healing markers Diana had been watching for, counting like blessings. "Just in time," Christopher said. "I was about to fire up the grill." "Need any help?" James offered. "Absolutely. Someone needs to make sure I don't char the steaks beyond recognition." The men headed toward the back of the house, their conversation flowing with the comfortable rhythm of long friendship. Diana and Rebecca followed at a more leisurely pace, admiring the stone pathway that wound through newly planted herb gardens. "He seems good," Rebecca said quietly. "Really good." Diana nodded. "He has his moments still. Nights when the memories surface. Days when something triggers a flash of anger or pain. But yes, he's healing." "And you?" Rebecca asked perceptively. "How are you doing with all of this?" The question caught Diana slightly off guard. Throughout the ordeal, so much focus had been on Christopher's well-being that few people thought to ask about her own. As the mother, the protector, she was expected to be the strong one, the stable force. Diana paused, considering her answer carefully. "I'm recalibrating, learning to stop looking for dangers around every corner, reminding myself that not every relationship in Christopher's life will be a threat." Rebecca nodded understandingly. "Hypervigilance." My sister went through something similar after her house was broken into. Said it took months before she stopped waking up at every little noise. Exactly, Diana agreed, though I'm getting better. I didn't run a background check on your husband, for instance, she added with a wry smile. Rebecca laughed. High praise indeed. They reached the back terrace, where Christopher had transformed what had once been an overgrown, neglected space into an elegant outdoor living area. Stone pavers created a spacious patio surrounding a fire pit, with comfortable seating arranged for conversation. Beyond, the renovated barn had been converted into a combination workshop and guest house. The property sloped gently down to a small pond, its surface rippling with the afternoon breeze. James was already manning the grill while Christopher arranged platters of vegetables and prepared a salad at an outdoor prep station. Diana was struck by how at ease her son appeared in this space he had created, how the tension that had seemed a permanent fixture in his shoulders over the past year had finally begun to dissipate. Wine, Christopher offered, already reaching for glasses. As they settled into comfortable chairs around the fire pit, the conversation flowed naturally from topic to topic. James's recent promotion, Rebecca's new research grant, the expansion of Westfield Enterprises into sustainable energy projects. Normal conversation. Ordinary moments that now felt extraordinary in their simplicity. Diana found herself speaking less and observing more, savoring the sight of her son engaged and present in a way he hadn't been since before Vanessa entered their lives. When Christopher laughed at something James said, a genuine, unguarded laugh that reached his eyes, she felt a knot of worry she hadn't even realized she was still carrying finally begin to loosen. Later, after a leisurely dinner as twilight descended and the fire pit cast a warm glow over their small gathering, Rebecca mentioned an upcoming charity gala her hospital was hosting. You should come, Christopher, she suggested. It's for a good cause, and my colleague Madeline was just asking about you the other day. Diana held her breath, watching her son's reaction carefully. This was the first time anyone had made even an oblique suggestion about dating since the divorce had been finalized. Christopher's expression flickered briefly with something, uncertainty, apprehension, before settling into thoughtful consideration. Maybe, he said finally. Send me the details? Not an enthusiastic acceptance, but not an outright refusal either. Diana exchanged a subtle glance with Rebecca, both women recognizing the significance of this small step. As the evening progressed and the stars appeared overhead, Diana found herself filled with a profound sense of gratitude. Not just for the safety and justice they had secured, but for these quiet moments of normalcy that had once seemed so far out of reach. When James and Rebecca eventually departed with promises to return soon, Christopher and Diana remained by the fire, content in companionable silence. The crackling flames cast dancing shadows across the terrace, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called into the night. I've been thinking about something, Christopher said finally, his voice quiet but steady. About what you said to me the day before the trial. About how what happened would be part of my story, but wouldn't define my whole story. Diana nodded, remembering the conversation clearly. And I think I'm ready to start the next chapter. He stared into the flames, his profile illuminated by the golden light. I'm not naive enough to think I'll ever trust the way I did before, but I'm also not willing to let them take anything more from me than they already have. Including the possibility of love? Diana asked gently. Christopher considered this. Including that. Eventually, he turned to look at her directly. But I've realized something important, Mom. Through all of this, the betrayal, the trial, rebuilding this house, I never once questioned whether I was loved because I had you. Diana felt tears spring to her eyes, unexpected and overwhelming. You always will. I know. He reached over and took her hand, his grip warm and strong. That certainty, that there is at least one person in this world whose love is genuine and unconditional, that's what got me through. What continues to get me through. Diana squeezed his hand, unable to speak past the emotion tightening her throat. "Remember what you told me about Mother's intuition? The day everything happened?" Christopher asked. Diana nodded. "That it never fails. I've been thinking about that too. About how you sensed something was wrong from the very beginning. How you protected me even when I didn't want your protection." He gazed back toward the fire. "I think there's a kind of love that sees clearly even when everyone else is blind. That's what you've always given me." They sat in silence for a moment, the depth of feeling between them requiring no further words. Eventually, Diana rose and pressed a kiss to her son's forehead, just as she had done when he was a little boy. "It's getting late. I should head back to the city." Christopher stood as well. "Stay," he suggested. "The guest room is finally finished. We could have breakfast in the morning before you go." Diana smiled, recognizing this too as part of healing, her son finding comfort in her presence rather than chafing against it. "I'd like that." As they moved about the house, closing windows and turning off lights, Diana paused in the kitchen doorway, watching as Christopher methodically wiped down counters and stored leftover food in containers neatly labeled with dates. His home, his rules, his life, reclaimed piece by piece. Later, as she prepared for bed in the beautifully appointed guest room, Diana noticed a framed photograph on the bedside table that hadn't been there during her last visit. It showed 3 people on a boat: Christopher as a teenager, flanked by his parents, all of them laughing as wind tousled their hair. Diana picked it up, her fingers tracing the image of her late husband's face, remembering that perfect summer day on the Cape. Christopher appeared in the doorway, carrying an extra blanket. "Found that when I was going through some old boxes," he explained, seeing the photograph in her hands. "Thought it belonged here." Diana nodded, understanding the significance. In Vanessa's calculated design of their shared home, family photographs had been minimized, displayed only in the most formal, staged poses. This casual, joyful moment captured in time represented not just a memory, but a reclaiming of Christopher's history, his foundations. "It's perfect," she said, returning the frame to its place of honor. Christopher set the blanket at the foot of the bed and turned to go, then hesitated. "Mom, thank you for everything, for saving my life that day, for standing by me through all of this, for knowing exactly when to push and when to wait." Diana crossed the room and embraced her son, this grown man who would always in some way be her little boy. "There is nothing, nothing in this world I wouldn't do for you," she said fiercely. "Never forget that." Later, as Diana drifted toward sleep in the quiet of the country night, so different from her city apartment, she found herself reflecting on the journey they had traveled. The poison meant to end her life had instead revealed the unbreakable strength of their bond. The plot designed to destroy them had ultimately failed because its architects had fundamentally misunderstood what they were up against. Not just a protective mother, not just a devoted son, but a love that could see through deception to truth, that could endure betrayal and emerge intact. Outside, an autumn wind stirred the trees, sending leaves cascading like rain in the moonlight. Inside, in rooms made safe by vigilance and reclaimed by courage, mother and son slept peacefully, their lives no longer threatened but richly, authentically lived. The next chapter had already begun. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And drop a comment below. What city are you watching from? And if your heart tells you to, feel free to leave me a tip on Buy Me a Coffee. Just check the first pinned comment. Thanks for keeping me company and for the coffee, and I'll see you in the next story.